Hello, welcome to Ray-ality TV. I'm your host, Raymond Bakari, and today I'm joined by the State Representative for Rhode Island State House District 7, Representative David Morales. Representative Morales, how are you today?
Raymond, it's a pleasure to see you, and I just want to thank you again for the invitation. I am feeling pretty well. We just finished a long legislative week, but I'm very excited with all the progress that we're making.
Yeah, of course, anytime. You're always welcome on the show, and it's a pleasure of mine to have you on. Just diving right into the first question here, what made you want to get into politics?
I think first and foremost, lived experience. I grew up to a single mom, and watching her work multiple jobs just to provide for me and my older sister really had an impact on me at a young age. Because initially I always thought it was normal to watch someone struggle because I was surrounded by working class neighbors. My friends were not wealthy either. But as I got older, I began to realize that there is a high level of income inequality that forces people like my mom to be exploited in terms of working long hours for very minimal pay. And she worked multiple jobs, especially during the holidays. She would work up to 3 jobs, whether it was at a gas station, a grocery store, picking vegetables or fruits from the fields. So I saw a lot of that hard labor directly. And it wasn't, again, until I got older, when I was roughly in high school, that I began to realize and understand that the government could actually address a lot of those issues, most specifically low wages, most specifically making sure that there's healthcare coverage for those who need it. Because I'm sure we'll get into it as the conversation goes along, right? But oftentimes we have a lot of working people who don't necessarily qualify for Medicaid, but at the end of the day, they still can't get health insurance from their employer, or if they do, it ends up being too expensive. But all that to say, I'm indebted to my mom and all that she did for my sister and I, especially because something I don't always share often, but my dad was an alcoholic and was addicted to drugs. And unfortunately, did not necessarily have a safety net or a resource to access when he was struggling with those issues himself. But overall, I would like to say it's going to be lived experience that really pushes a lot of the policies that I'm advocating for, because I want to make sure that all working people are protected both socially and economically.
Yeah, and you had mentioned there are a lot of issues like healthcare and addressing the minimum wage. We're going to get into that definitely in this conversation. Starting off, one of the big issues you have been fighting for as state rep so far is for a universal healthcare system here in Rhode Island. Why do you feel this would be beneficial for Rhode Islanders?
Because right now we have over 40,000 people who do not have any form of healthcare coverage. And for those individuals who do have health insurance, about 42% of them are underinsured, which essentially means that they technically have health insurance, but they do not receive medical treatment or go to the doctor because the copays and out-of-pocket expenses are still too expensive. So in other words, I would say that in a way, they still don't have the healthcare coverage that they need. Technically, that safety net is available for them if they ever go to the emergency room. It's not going to be as expensive as if they were uninsured. But at the end of the day, if you can't go in for a basic checkup because you are concerned about the costs, or you are concerned that you're going to learn something about your health that will lead you into medical debt, that is not a sustainable model. And I do not believe that we should be enabling a for-profit healthcare system, because that's going to lead to health disparities, which disproportionately affect poor people, disproportionately affect communities of color. And furthermore, it essentially, in my mind, it goes back to the basic principles of, I think it's immoral. I think it's immoral for there to be a system that benefits from diseases, a system that benefits from people being ill and is dependent on that. So ultimately, I don't think it's a sustainable model, both for the actual people experiencing it, but also as a state, we're going to recognize that it's actually more and more expensive, because at the end of the day, the insurance companies are focused on profit. And they're going to continue trying to outsource Medicaid. They're going to continue trying to outsource health services and tell the government that we're going to do it in a more efficient and cheaper way, despite the fact that it's less effective and in some cases actually more expensive. So ultimately, I think the best step to take as of right now is I do have a bill in place alongside Representative John Lombardi and Representative Brandon Potter to establish a study commission. And that was a bill I was very happy to co-sponsor. And this one would essentially, like I said, establish a study commission to study the implementation and establishment of a single payer Medicare for all type system here in Rhode Island. I myself have the actual single payer Medicare for all system bill in the House, as yet to receive a hearing in the Finance Committee. And while I understand that we are not going to transform our healthcare system overnight, I think it's important to have officials inside that state house who are advocating for these changes.
And this, along with many issues that you're advocating for, do have strong opinions on both sides. One of the big arguments from the critics of the universal healthcare system is mainly the cost and how it would be paid for. What they like to argue is that something that could end up costing trillions on a national level, and here on a local level, most likely billions, what they say, would result in a tax increase for those in the middle and working class. Just out of curiosity, how exactly would this get paid for if it were to pass and be signed into law? And would this result in any tax increases for middle and working class Rhode Islanders?
Yeah, so thank you for asking that. So I think what you highlighted is a perfect example of fear-mongering rhetoric that is spread throughout the mainstream media. And that is my way of saying that. That is essentially the taglines that wealthy people then tell the middle class and working people to convince them that an idea and a policy that will actually benefit them is going to be harmful to them. So they resort to misinformation and lies. Now, in terms of a Medicare for all healthcare system, it looks differently whether you choose to do it at the federal level or at the state level. I'm going to focus on the state level because that is what would impact us here in Rhode Island. So if we are to do it at the state level, it would not result in a tax increase for working or middle class people, because what would happen is we would request a waiver from the Biden administration or whoever the president is at the time when we pass this system. And what that waiver would do is essentially any payments or costs that we receive to cover Medicaid would not be going to the Medicaid fund. Instead, it would be going to what we call the Rhode Island Comprehensive Healthcare Program Fund. And that would be the fund that would essentially distribute that Medicare for all system to everyone who needs it. And again, would not necessarily be dependent on the Blue Cross Blue Shields of the world to provide it to us. And what we would do is essentially a lot of what we call the middle person, that being the health insurance carrier between the hospital and the patient, is we would break down that middle person and instead be able to connect that person directly with the healthcare provider that they need. And in terms of how this would be paid for as well, specifically, it would be a 10% payroll tax on large corporations. Hence, and I want to emphasize, large corporations, those who have 500 or more employers, not our small businesses, because again, that's another fear-mongering rhetoric that people like to tag onto. And when you actually do the math, it would be a lot cheaper and more cost efficient for a large company to pay into this payroll tax than to having to contract with the health insurance companies to provide their employees healthcare, which they are required to do already. So overall, when you actually, again, it takes some explanation, and it took me about a minute and a half to really explain that to you in detail. It becomes very easy for the opponents of a Medicare for all system, those opponents being the ones whose profits would be impacted, to spread all of this misinformation and lies without actually explaining the real details in terms of how this program would work.
And the issue of healthcare is like a very big issue with an umbrella of sub issues. And I just want to cover another one while we're still on the healthcare related issues. Another one you've been advocating for is lowering the prescription drug costs. What could be done to achieve that goal here in Rhode Island?
There are various ways we can do it. I believe the most direct way to do it is just capping copays, because the way it works, and again, takes a little bit of explanation, is the drug manufacturers develop a drug such as insulin. Only costs about $3 per vial to actually produce and manufacture and ship out. Unfortunately, however, this is marked up, and they will sell it to the insurance companies for about $300. Then the insurance companies will take it back to the patient and charge them about $600. So as you can see, everyone's kind of like, in a way, right, I'm gonna be a little informal, everyone's kind of like ripping each other off. And the person who's benefiting the most is the drug manufacturers. And of course, the health insurance entities also get a kick out of that profit as well. And the person who's hurt the most is the patient and the person who depends on it. So I think the most direct way to do it, especially with drugs that do not cost that much to produce, such as insulin, is you just cap the copays, you cap the out-of-pocket expenses, and you tell the health insurance companies, it is now your responsibility, because you are the only entity in the country who has the privilege to directly negotiate with drug manufacturers. Keep in mind, the government is not allowed to do it based on federal regulation. So the moment you start cutting into the health insurance profits, the health insurance company is then forced to go back to the drug manufacturer and tell them they're cutting into our profits. We are not going to pay these outrageous amounts that you've been charging us, because now we can't benefit from it. Hence, the drug manufacturers are then forced to lower the prices as a result. And I say that because that has been a case study that has been seen in Colorado, that has been seen in New Mexico, and has been seen in various other states where they have capped, specifically, I lean back onto insulin, but some states have also started doing the same caps on what we call specialty medication, which is designed for chronic diseases and illnesses such as cancer and HIV. And again, the drug manufacturers become a monopoly of these products, of these drugs, and they are able to abuse the system. And since the federal government cannot intervene, or any form of government can intervene, they could do it. But that's why it's important to recognize what policies we could adopt. And alongside that, one bill I was very proud to co-sponsor this year, Representative Ackerman introduced one that would allow us to have a regulation board. And what I mean by that is that there would be somewhere within the Office of the Health Insurance Commissioner to work directly with the drug manufacturers and understand why they're pricing the drugs the way they are. So in other words, it's like calling for more transparency, and it holds the drug manufacturers' feet to the fire in terms of why they're increasing the outrageous amounts of drugs in terms of the price. Furthermore, we also have a bill in place introduced by Representative Anastasia Williams that would allow us to import prescription drugs from Canada. And I believe that's another tool we have in terms of adopting policies to make medicine cheaper and affordable for those who need it and depend on it.
And this is one of those bipartisan issues. I have heard of Republicans being supportive of lowering prescription drug costs. I believe former President Trump was in favor of doing that, but I'm not sure what progress they had made on it. Has there been any Republicans in the state legislature that you've been able to get on board with this?
So generally, when I introduce the two bills I've introduced in committee so far focused on prescription drug pricing, that being insulin at $25 a month and that being specialty medication at $100 a month. I have not received any opposition from any Republicans, nor have I necessarily had any Republicans come out loud and tell me, hey, this is a really good bill. Though I have had some more like conservative Democrats come up to me and tell me, I don't always agree with some of your ideas or the way you approach it, but I do think that these issues that you're fighting for, specifically the specialty medication, are really important. And that's something that I'm in support of alongside you.
And you're also on board with raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. One of the topics we had discussed a little bit at the top of this interview here in Rhode Island, raising the minimum wage to $15. This has a really good chance of passing the General Assembly and then being signed into law by Governor McKee. Where is that? Because there are, as we mentioned before we went on camera, there's like 1,000 bills submitted, and it's kind of a little tough for everybody to track the progress. Where's the $15 minimum wage bill currently in the process of being passed and signed into law?
Yeah, so there has already been a committee hearing for it in the House Committee of Labor, and right now it is being held for further study. So in about a month or so, I think we will see it being considered out of the Labor Committee and then ultimately going on to the House floor for a vote, which in and of itself is not a guarantee to actually pass. So we have to make sure we're ready to advocate. And I do want to mention something that's very important, especially in the context that we're talking right now, 2021. We're talking about raising the minimum wage to $15 by roughly 2024. The fight for 15 started back in 2009. The fight for 15 started back in 2010. I think we're really behind, and I'm optimistic that we are going to pass the $15 minimum wage, though I don't take anything for granted. We're going to have to fight very hard for it. But I want to get us at a place where it doesn't stop at 2024. And following that, we're able to adjust for inflation or the price index, whatever meter we want to use to measure it. But essentially, we need to make sure that every year following 2024, there is an incremental increase to keep up with the cost of living, because rent continues to escalate. We all know that we're in an affordable housing crisis right now. Healthcare continues to get more expensive in terms of your annual premiums, in terms of the deductibles. Groceries are getting more expensive, right? Milk costs more on an annual basis. Even if it's nothing too significant, it adds up every year. Gas is starting to increase as well. So my point is, like, things that we use in our daily lives increase naturally every single year, except for the wages. And that in of itself just does not make any sense at all. So that's why, for me, it's going to be really big that if we could add an amendment to make sure that after 2024, there's still an incremental increase, we need to take that. And we cannot just be settled and satisfied with $15 by 2024, because at that point, I think it's already outdated, and it's definitely going to help some people, but it's not helping them as much as it should be.
And you had mentioned that there is going to be a big fight, to get that bill signed into law. And also it's been on the goal since 2009, you said?
Correct. Fight for 15 started by McDonald's workers back in Chicago.
And there's a lot of probably one of the big reasons is the common criticisms that you hear against raising the minimum wage, and this will probably be heard a lot during the testimony. A lot of those who are against it point out what they say, how it could hurt small businesses, especially since those same businesses were being strangled to death during the pandemic, as well as prices of items going up to cancel out the growth in wages. And then they also bring up another argument of why not just lower taxes? What's your response to those common arguments heard in the discussion of raising the minimum wage? And are those common concerns being taken into consideration when the discussions are going on about raising the minimum wage?
So I just want to be clear that it is always very interesting to see how selective the Chamber of Commerce are and these business coalitions are when it comes to being concerned about the health of the small businesses. I think they like to use them as a scapegoat when it comes to raising the minimum wage, for sure. While I do believe that the minimum wage should be considered in terms of the capacity of the small businesses, I think that also raises the issue of, have we been doing enough to support our small businesses during the pandemic? And I would say no. I think the Restore Rhode Island grant was a good start, did not go far enough, was not accessible enough, because we have a lot of Latino-owned businesses here in District 7 in the Mount Pleasant Valley and Elmhurst neighborhood. I could count on my fingers the amount of them that actually got the Restore RI grant. One of the main reasons they got it was because I went there directly with the application and I had a consultant with me who was willing to help them on it. In other words, they wouldn't have received the grant. Not every district has an official who is going to be knocking at their doors telling them about this opportunity. There are a lot of small businesses of color that were left out of it. So my argument is, if someone wants to pose the issue of raising the minimum wage to $15 because of the impact it's going to have on our small businesses, I expect to see them on the front lines really trying to fight for more viable support for our small businesses during the COVID-19 pandemic. And following that, I think there will be a more credible conversation in terms of that. And as for cutting taxes, I have not heard that argument. I find that one to be very humorous, because we often hear that like we're in a deficit, or that we can't pay, or that we can't pay for anything in our budget. So why would we be cutting more from our budget? It's like, who is intentionally, I'm curious, who is telling us, hey, let's have less funding for our schools, especially during times like these? That to me makes no sense whatsoever. And it probably comes back down to, who are the people saying it, right? It's not, working people are not saying don't raise the minimum wage. Working people aren't necessarily, aside from property taxes, you're not really hearing working people complain too much about their income taxes. Yeah, it seems to be like the wealthy individuals are the ones who want that tax cut. And again, it always just comes back to the basic principle of greed. And I think we highlighted it during our discussion about healthcare, whether it's drug manufacturers, health insurance companies, certain corporate lobbyists. It always comes back down to the profit margin. And again, I think they are concerned. They're scared that it passed the Senate. And now that's going over to the House, yeah, we're going to get ready for a lot of fear-mongering rhetoric. I'm getting ready to hear a lot of officials spew the words that a corporate lobbyist would otherwise say during a committee hearing.
And just shifting the focus a little bit while we're still on the topic of wages and all that, a lot of people who are essential workers would also see their wages go up when the minimum wage goes up. And I kind of want to shift the focus for a moment, because one of the key issues that you have been advocating for to be addressed is hazard pay for essential workers. Where is that bill currently when it comes to the legislative process? And what are some of the key details that Rhode Islanders should know about the bill? Like, say, for example, how much is being proposed for a hazard pay for essential workers?
Yes, thanks so much for asking that, Ray. So my bill to provide essential workers, that being individuals at grocery stores, that being individuals in healthcare facilities, janitorial staff, credit unions, banks, anyone who has been essential over this past year to provide us with services and has been risking their health to do that, deserves additional compensation. And what this looks like is 1.3 times one's base pay. So in other words, if you make $12 an hour under this hazard pay bill, your wage would go up to $15.60 an hour. Now, I want to be specific in terms of who this would affect, however, because again, as someone who does advocate for a lot of our small businesses, specifically and especially those owned by people of color, I made sure to have the threshold at employers who have 50 or more employees. Most small businesses do not have 50 or more employees. Even restaurants usually cap it around 40 if they have multiple shifts. So this would not impact any of our small businesses. This would predominantly impact some of the larger entities in our state, such as CVS, such as Walmart, Target, again, Citizens Bank, all of these different institutions, Price Right, Stop and Shop, Trader Joe's, Aldi's, the list can go on and on. But a lot of these large entities that rake in millions to billions in profit are paying their workers less than $12 an hour, despite the fact that they're forced to wear a face mask for 8 hours at a time and interact with dozens of people daily. I think at the very least deserve some additional compensation for it. And I know at the beginning of the pandemic, and again, it's really sad to say, only at the beginning of the pandemic, from March to roughly mid-June, it was from my understanding that Stop and Shop was providing some form of hazard pay. After those 3 months, however, it went away. And again, I personally believe that hazard pay hasn't been seen as a really credible policy, and it upsets me. It really upsets me that we have not actually considered it to be something where we can say, thank you for risking your health, risking the health of your loved ones to provide us with these vital services. I believe you should receive a little bit more pay just for doing that. Unfortunately, I don't think it's gained enough traction the way it should have, especially because you drive around and if you pass by any healthcare facility, specifically the nursing homes, you will always see banners that say, we love our healthcare heroes. Thank you, healthcare heroes. But when it comes down to actually providing them with the compensation they need to pay their daily expenses, there's no additional compensation to be found. There's no additional pay to be found. There's no additional benefits to be found. So I'm going to continue pushing for this bill. We did have a committee hearing for it back in February in the House Labor Committee. And I actually think it was probably one of my better hearings of the year. We did have multiple questions asked by committee members, and I think they were all in good faith. But they realized that I had the answers to them and that it actually made a lot of sense. Because initially some people asked me like, oh, what are you going to do about the small businesses? And of course I told them, well, if you read the bill, it's 50 plus, hence only impacting bigger businesses.
And just shifting the focus to others, because I have a couple more I still want to cover, because there was a lot, like how I mentioned at the top of the interview, like 1,000 plus bills introduced. Other issues that you've also prioritized are affordable housing and ending source of income discrimination. There are other things that landlords and homeowners have the right to use when it comes to renting to people aside from where income comes from. That's a point that doesn't get introduced a lot when it comes to the arguments that the critics bring up. What were the reactions from some of the homeowners from some of the homeowners that you've heard when it comes to this issue?
In terms of source of income discrimination?
Yeah, and affordable housing, like that umbrella.
Yeah, I was surprised. I did not hear that much resistance towards it. And I think it's because this has been a fight that's been going on for so long that people are recognizing like they're not really asking for much. They just want to make sure that working people, poor people, and again, disproportionately people of color have a safe space to live. The pushback you do receive is the fact that, you know, some people don't want to have their units inspected because they have to be in accordance with regulations from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, right? So HUD does have to oversee the unit. And I know that for some people, certain property owners, they see it as a burden that they don't want to take on. However, if you want to call yourself a property owner or a landlord, your unit should be up to code regardless of whether or not the person you're renting to has a housing voucher. So that's why I don't buy too much into that argument in of itself. Because again, being a property owner is an investment. Therefore, you should be willing to take the investments if you're going to charge market rate for your unit. Especially because, as we've discussed earlier, we're in an affordable housing crisis. We have a lot of units that aren't even market rate anymore. As for affordable housing, the way we are going to achieve affordable housing is going to be through the budget. That's as direct as it gets. I'm sorry. I don't think there needs to be that many complicated policies to really try to grasp and understand the issue of affordable housing. For me, it simply looks like devote at least $20 million a year into the Rhode Island state budget, increase it incrementally every year, and devote it towards the development of affordable housing. Use and encourage your governments to use eminent domain as needed in order to develop some more dense housing, as opposed to trying to figure out some very wonky policies as to how we can incorporate affordable housing and meet the 10% threshold, as long as you give the cities and the towns the money and you direct them very specifically on how to best approach this issue, and you work with the city leaders, I think that we can get to 10% affordable housing across the state.
And you had mentioned the pushback, and it's interesting that you had mentioned that because I recall when this was being talked about on Twitter, there was an interesting thread. There was like a whole argument between one homeowner and the one person who was like very in favor of the ending the source of income discrimination. Their point was that there are other things that landlords and homeowners have the right to look at when it comes to renting to tenants, you know, like background checks and all that. And the homeowners who weren't in favor of it, they were in the mindset where they say at the end of the day, if someone owns a house and doesn't want to rent to someone, income sources aside, and just the fact that they don't want to rent, in theory, shouldn't be forced to rent if they don't want to. That was their argument on this thread. So the issue of where the income comes from aside, if someone doesn't want to rent at all and they own the home, and you know this was a concern that one of them had, can you assure those homeowners that they won't be forced to rent if they don't want to?
Well, if it's because of the source of income, then no, that guarantee can't be said, because that's what the law does. The law says that if you are intentionally telling an individual, or you refuse to rent to them because of the source of income that they receive, that being a legal source of income, then that is illegal and they can be taken to court for it.
Like in general, like the income aside, because like one of the common arguments I heard, and I don't know if this was them sparking a chain reaction, they had mentioned that this is going to open the door for them to be forced to rent. Like the income aside, they wouldn't be forced to rent.
And see, it always comes back down to the details. Sometimes it's individuals who, again, didn't actually read the bill or understand. And again, I'm not poking fun at anyone, because I do think legal language is inaccessible to a large degree. But I don't think people miss the point of the actual bill itself. So no, it's not causing this floodgate of like, now you are forced to rent to anyone and everyone. Thank
And
you for
now,
that.
yeah, no problem. Because it like one of my main goals whenever it comes to these issues is, you know, to give both sides the clear chance to give their argument, and also, you know, any discrepancies or logical fallacies gets left at the door. That's kind of what my apologies for a little bit of the confusion on the way I worded that one, but I just wanted to
no
get
worries. I mean, don't
clarification
get
out
me
there.
wrong. I do think there are a lot of slippery slope arguments when it comes to certain issues focused on socioeconomic mobility.
And another big issue, quick segue to another big issue, is shifting the focus to education. You're a big advocate for public schools. Just out of curiosity, because this is going to be a big issue, especially since Governor McKee said on Newsmakers that he would veto the charter school moratorium. Where do you stand on the expansion of charter schools?
I do not believe that charter school networks should be expanding in the state of Rhode Island. I want to emphasize charter school networks. I believe a single standing charter school like Paul Cuffey provides very high quality education and programming tailored to the students that they're serving. An achievement first network, however, in their mayoral academies, do not do that. They teach to the test. It is a strict environment. They do not prioritize socio-emotional value with their students. And all they want is to be able to enroll more and more students each and every single year in order to take it back to their charter management organizations. So they will teach to the test to ensure that the RICAS scores are high, regardless of the social and emotional impact it has on their students. So I do not think organizations like them, whose sole purpose is to expand as much as possible, should be expanding in our state. And again, those are charter school networks owned and controlled by charter management organizations. So that's my stance on it. I think it's just very straightforward. If we want to talk about single standing charter schools, I think there is room for that, yes.
So just to kind of summarize it, you're like, when it comes to nonprofit charter schools, you'd be more in favor of those as opposed to for-profit?
Yes, I mean, legally, I don't even know if we're using the right terms, because I don't know if they're technically, it's like a for-profit charter school. They're right, they're still registered as a nonprofit in a way. But again, if you're a charter school network, there is some profit coming in. So I would say, yeah, they are technically for-profit. Legally speaking, though, technically not.
And this kind of also goes into the sub issues like school choice, and the common question that has been heard when it comes to expansion to charter schools, especially from those that are super in favor of it. They ask, why is it such a problem for there to be more charter schools so parents can send their child to a school that isn't in a failing district like Providence or Central Falls that required state takeovers after what they say were millions of dollars spent? What would be your response to those common questions and concerns?
Yeah, so I think there's still flexibility of school choice within the public school system, right? I mean, I think that's why you have a situation where Unfortunately, there are some parents in our local school district who are really trying their hardest to make sure their child is enrolled at classical high school as opposed to Mount Pleasant High School. So there's still some flexibility there. I think the purpose that we're really trying to get at is we want to ensure that our children and our youth are being sent to academic institutions that, again, prioritize their well-being and are really making that push to ensure that there's some form of academic achievement, as opposed to, again, a larger charter management organization that does not necessarily prioritize the well-being of their youth and their children, but instead are focused on what is the score on the next RICAST exam going to be? What is the next student that we could highlight on our newsletter in order to convince the world that charter schools are better than public schools? So I don't think you're taking away choice necessarily when you put a moratorium on certain charter school institutions. And again, maybe that's something that we could look into when it comes to amending the law, because from my understanding, yes, Governor McKee has been very vocal that he would veto it, though the Senate actually has enough votes to override that veto anyways, for what it's worth. But in terms of it going to the House floor for that charter school moratorium, I will probably be voting in support of it.
And you had mentioned possible amendments that could be added to it. And another big issue that I had kind of mentioned in the last question was school choice, where it would fund students. And a lot of states have been on the bandwagon in the past. And it's like Montana, I believe, New Hampshire is another one, Arizona. They're making the move on this, where it would fund the tax. I believe it's the tax dollars that would fund the students instead of the systems. And students wouldn't be restricted what schools they can go to by their zip code. Have you or your colleagues at the state legislature considered making an amendment or passing something like school choice, where the tax dollars follow the student instead of the school systems, and children aren't restricted to their educational opportunities by zip code?
So that would require revising the education funding formula that for the past 5 years has not been touched, even though, we have a study commission on it and officials are working very hard on analyzing it and trying to see what works best for everyone. Again, I don't really think it's a very complicated issue. In my opinion, you ensure that school districts receive funding per English language learner pupil, and they're not combined alongside free and reduced lunch pupils because they're not mutually exclusive. You make sure that transportation is covered as well, that every school district has the means to be able to transport the students that are going to be going in to the district from out of town. So in other words, I think we could adopt a model that is similar in terms of per pupil funding and not necessarily district based. But again, I don't think it's a one size fits all model. I think some of the states that you cited have actually seen decreases in education spending as a result of adopting a per pupil model. So I would never be in support of something that would reduce our education spending.
And moving on to another big issue that you've been advocating for when you were running for state rep, and now even more so since you've become state rep, and that's passing a Green New Deal in Rhode Island. And here, this is like how we mentioned with probably a bunch of issues throughout this. There's a lot of tricky elements in certain language when it comes to the arguments on this. On a national level, it was projected to cost at least $10 trillion a year when it was introduced by Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. In Rhode Island, here's when the arguments come in from those against it. In Rhode Island, we already have an inflated budget of almost $13 billion for a state with little over 1 million residents. Well, the last one was $12.7 billion, so almost $13 billion, the last budget for a state with a little over 1 million residents. And this is a bit of a multi-part question. What would be in this Green New Deal for Rhode Island proposal? How much would it cost? And kind of citing back to the earlier question, would middle class and working class Rhode Islanders see any tax increases if it becomes law?
Yes, so I want to be clear, there's no definite Green New Deal policy. You're not going to have a bill that is titled Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is an intersectional approach to addressing the housing crisis. It is an intersectional approach to addressing the lack of high quality jobs. It is an intersectional approach towards environmental sustainability. Therefore, it is a combination of multiple programs. You will not get to the Green New Deal unless you adequately fund affordable housing in the state budget annually, which is why I mentioned that earlier. You will not get to the Green New Deal unless you have carbon emission reduction goals, which thankfully we're going to see the Act on Climate pass very soon, and that's going to get us there. You see, so they all work together is my point. All of these policies are connected with each other, because you are not going to get to 100% renewable energy unless you take away the interconnection authority of National Grid and you transfer it over to a public entity that will actually prioritize the general welfare of the state. As for some of these ambitious programs in general and the different policies we've talked about and how much it would cost, I always love having conversations about the budget, because if we want to really get serious about like any deficits or our concerns about how much we're spending in such a small state, then perhaps we should cut out some of the corporate welfare we have in place. Perhaps we should start looking back at the fact that we cut the corporate tax rate. And furthermore, look at the fact that we have large institutions such as Brown University, which make up about 40% of the acreage in Providence and is essentially tax exempt, thus forcing taxes to increase on working and middle class people in terms of their property taxes. So I believe we have the tools in the budget to really invest in our people, but we self-sabotage it. And by that, I mean the influence of the lobbyists that then influence certain officials to make decisions that are not popular. For example, we're about to rip apart Kennedy Plaza, and we're going to have one main bus hub split into 3 different bus hubs. And despite opposition and resistance from the people who actually ride the bus, we're willing to spend over $30 million on this project that no one, in terms of those who would be affected, actually agree on. So I don't want to hear these conversations so much in terms of the budget and being irresponsible with spending, because I would argue that's irresponsible spending. But you don't see the watchdogs pointing it out as much as when it comes to, actually investing in healthcare and investing in education. All of a sudden, we become policy experts and we become so concerned about our budget. But that concern is nowhere to be seen when it comes to corporate welfare. Now, in terms of taxes, again, no working person or middle class person is going to be hurt as a result of these programs. The only individuals whose taxes should be impacted to fund these programs are already stated are large institutions like Brown University, who have millions and billions in assets, but do not pay their fair share. And alongside that, the wealthiest individuals in our state who make over $495,000 a year and have been paying a 6% income tax rate, which is the same as a working person since 2006. This is a conversation we do not have enough. About 15 years ago, we cut taxes, income taxes, for the wealthiest people in our state. They went from paying a 9.99% income tax rate, 10% essentially, to now a 6% income tax rate. And as a result of that, our state and projections have shown this to be true. We have lost over $1 billion in tax revenue. That's $1 billion that we could have invested back into our communities. That is $1 billion that we could have used to help jumpstart the Green New Deal. So all that to say is I believe it is possible to create a better future and a better world for the people in our state. And it is not going to disrupt the economy in order for us to get there.
And just before I shift away from the political issues for my last 2 questions, this follow-up while we're still on the Green New Deal topic, is there a ballpark figure that we could get for how much the Green New Deal will cost? Well, and with these proposals, how much would they cost? Like what would be a ballpark figure? And you did mention the only big corporations would receive the tax increase. Is there a certain income bracket where you would cap tax increases at? And what would be the
that's what I said earlier.
Figures?
If you are to repeal the 2006 tax cuts for the wealthy, what you would see is a situation where someone who makes over $495,000 a year, keep in mind it's essentially $500,000, their taxes would go back to being 9.99%, the same way it was prior to 2006. If you do not make $495,000, and that is a vast majority of Rhode Island, I'd say probably about 98, 99% of the state, your taxes aren't being raised. You're not going to see a tax increase. In terms of the corporate tax, I don't really see there being any political will to repeal the tax cuts that we made under Speaker Mattiello. So I believe that one is going to stay put as is. Nevertheless, I do think we should get to a point where we really begin having more auditing and tax assessors analyzing the use of nonprofits and how they're using their tax exemption status and the property that's tax exempt. In other words, I kind of want Brown University to start paying their fair share. Again, not going to impact a working person or a middle class person. But I'm sure their lobbyists will tell you it will. That way you could become concerned.
So in terms of taxes, only the people making 400K or more would receive the increase, is what I'm hearing for that?
495K.
495K or more. So if it's less, like if someone's making like 60, 70K, no tax increase?
No.
Okay, and just because I kind of want to get this one addressed as well before I moved on to the last two questions. Ballpark figure, how much would this probably cost? Like, are we talking 1 billion, 5 billion, 10 billion? Like,
How much would that cost? Sorry.
what would be the projected cost of things like the Green New Deal and all these proposals? Like, just a ballpark figure, if there is one, because like how I mentioned on the national level, it was projected 10 trillion a year. What would that look like for Rhode Island on a state level? Like the ballpark
Again,
figure.
only addressing certain pieces of it. If we're looking at affordable housing, if it's up to me, we're investing at least 20 million a year in affordable housing. As for other projects, again, that's going to be, I don't want to state what can and can't be because we haven't even gone past interconnection. We are still under the control of National Grid on whether or not a renewable energy project's going to receive approval. So until we even get there, we can't have conversations about developing renewable energy. Therefore, I can't really put a price tag on it because I don't know what that will is going to look like then.
And that is a fair point that is brought up because it's more of right now they're in the discussion phase of like getting these issues out to the public.
Framework, yeah, like we're still building on a framework, and because trust me, I would love to have a price tag to it. That way we could compare how much it would cost versus like the corporate welfare we give out, and then like the combination of like general obligation bonds as well, which interest rates are at an all-time low. Oh, it'd be great, but no, we're still in the phase of getting that framework together.
And I know I had said the ballpark figure was the final one, but this is another one that brought up because the argument of the budget being 12, like almost 13 billion the last year for a state with a little over 1 million residents. Would this see the budget get inflated and go higher? Like if it in a perfect world where you were able to get this all done like that, would we see the budget go up any higher?
Again, I think it depends on the leadership you have at the gubernatorial level and how creative people want to be. I don't think all these projects or, the idea of a Green New Deal has to be dependent on the state budget. You have bonds, general obligation bonds. You have revenue bonds. There are a lot of different resources you could try to extract. You could also start cutting the corporate welfare. So maybe that balances out the budget, right? Regardless, every year the budget does increase. Like throughout all of Governor Raimondo's tenure, each and every single year, the budget increased. Ironically, we're cutting Medicaid the entire time as well, but the budget naturally is going to increase. So Green New Deal or not, the budget will increase, not exponentially, but it will increase each and every single year thereafter.
And then now shifting the focus, because we kind of did go a little extensively into that, which was the goal, because I always like to go extensively into these, because some of these issues could take hours to debate and all that. Shifting the focus away from politics, because I always like to get away from the political questions in the last couple questions. This is something that we've gone back and forth on Twitter about. You're a big wrestling fan. I'm a big wrestling fan. And I have to ask these 5 things in this next question that every wrestling fan nowadays has to answer. And I'll kind of do it in like rapid fire lightning round format. So let's just go for it. Favorite wrestler of all time?
Right now, Samoa Joe.
All time? All right. And favorite match of all time?
Bret Hart versus Stone Cold Steve Austin, WrestleMania 13 submission match.
That was a good one. And that's kind of, we still don't know who walked out the heel. People say Bret walked out the heel. People
Bret walked out the heel. No, that was, that one.
A lot of people like to argue that started the rise of Austin's anti-hero persona because like right after that's when it just went off the rails. The Mike Tyson refereed match when he fought Michaels at Mania 14. Are you an AEW or WWE guy, or even Impact, because they're good too?
All right, so WWF, WWE, when it comes to nostalgia, current product, I'm gonna have to give it out to AEW. As you can see, I've been holding these belts since.
Hey, you've been prepared. I like that.
Oh, yes, you were right. I was prepared for that one. Yeah, current product, AEW goes all out every single week, and like I actually feel like the creative staff is thinking about us fans when they develop the show.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, whereas with WWE, I just feel like they kind of throw it at the wall and just wait till the next pay-per-view to produce quality, which again is not consistent.
And sometimes not even every pay-per-view is good. Like I think the last couple good pay-per-views have only been the big fours, like SummerSlam, the last one, Survivor Series, when we had Lesnar versus Daniel Bryan, and I think that was the same one when NXT joined that little brand warfare thing where they had like the champs and they include NXT, which was really good idea. I don't know why they don't keep going with that even at WrestleMania. What's your one dream match that hasn't happened yet?
There are probably several. As I mentioned earlier, Samoa Joe is one of my favorite wrestlers. And given his, I hope it's not an early retirement, but given that he's been sidelined for the past year and a half, there are a lot of matches he hasn't been able to have. I think a big one that we overlook is John Cena versus Samoa Joe, because they both started together in UPW back in 2001. A lot of people don't know that history. but they essentially got their start in professional wrestling together. And I think it'd be nice to have that full circle come together. Looking not so modern, however, Bret Hart versus Kurt Angle.
That would have been a
Ooh,
technical
make it an
masterclass.
ultimate submission match. Ooh.
That would have been like, was it Benoit versus Jericho? I don't know if it was it was who did Benoit face at Mania 17? Was it Jericho? No, Jericho faced Rigo. It was Benoit versus Angle, and then I don't know if the rematch at Backlash was a submission match or 2 out of 3 falls. I can picture that being something like that. Mine personally, if we're going historical, Sting versus Taker, that should have happened.
Oh no, you got it. Yeah, Sting versus Taker.
Or
actually.
Angle versus Taker, especially in 06. I don't know why that didn't happen. That would have been perfect. The money was right there. Even when Sting came back from Mania 31, to have Sting versus Triple H, that was garbage.
No,
trash.
that was a letdown, especially with the outcome. Hunter shouldn't have won.
And it's like, that was probably like, in my opinion, the last good years WWE had. Like the last good year I feel like WWE had was probably 2016 when the brand split first started, and SmackDown had that goated roster with Bray Wyatt, AJ Styles going into a Survivor Series. I'm marking out a little hard right now for WWE.
Me too, man. I mean, because the thing is, you said it perfectly. The 2016 roster was so stacked that no one was ignored. Like everyone had a role, and I think
exactly.
Made the ruthless aggression and the Attitude Era so special is that even someone like Spike Dudley, who in today's world would just be like a jobber, and that's it.
Yeah.
He had a role back then to play.
And fun fact, I respect Spike Dudley even more after finding out this fact. He's from Rhode Island. He's one of the very few famous wrestlers from Rhode Island.
He is from Rhode Island.
Dudley, Chuck Palumbo, and if we're going independent scene, Veda Scott, she does amazing work, and I think she did commentary for AEW this past summer. Amazing talent, all of them. And a lot of people don't know that when you look at famous wrestlers from Rhode Island. My final question for this before I go to my final question for the interview, what do you usually say, and this gets me annoyed as a wrestling fan too, when non-wrestling fans, when they find out we're a wrestling fan, they say, it's fake, right? What's your go-to response?
I say it is scripted. The same way that your favorite television show, the same way that our favorite movies are scripted. The action and the punishment and the physical brutality they go through is all too real. And I kind of like to leave it at that. But if I have to, I'll explain the fact that, people have been severely injured in the ring. I think
that's the harsh reality. They're on the road like 300 days a year. One wrong move, one slip, you can be paralyzed for the rest of your life.
Look at SummerSlam, right? When you look at Stone Cold versus Owen Hart.
I was just about to mention that. Or when Darren Drozdov, I don't know if this was on a dark match or if it was on a Raw. That one was very sad. And And he did it for the business, and he still has no hard feelings with everybody involved, and he still, loves the business. And that's what people don't realize. It's a business. We know it's scripted, but the action is way more physically demanding than I would say even most of the sports like football, to be honest with you. One wrong move, that can end a career like that. And the harsh reality that also doesn't get addressed are things like the healthcare for the wrestlers that AEW addresses. The unionization, that's why Jesse Ventura got fired in the 80s because Hulk Hogan ratted him out. See, we're like wrestling historians.
We're speaking each other's language, man. That's why I would never include Hulk Hogan in the Mount Rushmore of my Mount Rushmore anyways, because he stopped the unionizing efforts. He had, his case of racism, et cetera, et cetera.
He that's probably why he was the golden boy in the 80s too, when he ratted out Jesse Ventura. That's the big rumor and innuendo going on about that. And to be fair, you know what? Now I'm going to ask this before I go to my final question. Your Mount Rushmore of Wrestling, what's it, four on there? The 4.
Yeah, so Undertaker's on it without a doubt. Stone Cold Steve Austin is on it without a doubt. John Cena is on it. And now you have to go to someone in the golden era by default. And again, it's very easy to pick Hogan. And I'm not going to pick Hogan, so I'm going to have to go with the Nature Boy Ric Flair. Just because of his longevity. I'd love to go Macho Man, but at the end of the day,
he didn't really get as much of the opportunities, and his career was kind of short-stopped a little bit before he went to WCW. And even his WCW run was just it was underrated. Like every time he got the belt, Hogan won it the next week or the next night. It's just crazy to think about, and that was a poor use of a great talent. And even Bret Hart in WCW.
We don't talk about Bret Hart in WCW.
That was imagine
that was bad. Yeah, that was just shameful. They had the hottest angle in professional wrestling, and they just blew it.
Imagine it's just like you get the best, literally probably the best wrestler in the country, and probably the whole world. Well, let's say country, because New Japan was really good in the 90s, 2000s, etc. You get the best wrestler in the world who could put on the best match. He could carry anybody. He even carried that one guy, I forgot his name, that Vince gave the tryout in Madison Square Garden. and Vince was going to push him to the moon, but
Oh,
until he realized Bret Hart carried him in the tryout match. It's just like Bret Hart can make a nobody into a star. He can wrestle a broom and it'll be entertaining. You just make him heel, have him join the NWO, and then Goldberg ruined his career. That was. But Goldberg's a nice guy. I had met him when we had the New England Fan Fest back in Providence, like 7 years ago or something like that.
I remember that. Yeah, but
We need to get more conventions and more like of a wrestling scene in Rhode Island. Maybe we got to call up Spike Dudley and Chuck Palumbo one of these days.
We need more professional wrestling in Rhode Island. I agree with you.
Without a doubt. My final question, moving on from the wrestling topic, my final question is one that I ask everyone here on the show to keep tradition that has some involvement with Rhode Island, and that is, in your opinion, what do you think Rhode Island is best known for?
In the spirit of spring, I'm going to say Dell's Lemonade right now. I'm going to close the book there.
That's one of the big answers. Now, the real question is with or without a straw?
Without.
Okay, because if you say with a straw, that
shouldn't even be a question. But
it has to be without a straw. That's the ultimate Rhode Island thing.
It has to be without a straw. That's why when I hear with straw,
I remember. I think it was even on Twitter. Andrew Yang, he got clowned for having it with the straw. He's because he has the Rhode Island connection because he went to Brown University and he's been in Providence a couple times to give speeches back when he was an entrepreneur pre-presidential run. And it's just without a straw, that's the ultimate thing. Thank you once again, Rep Morales, for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure of mine to have you on.
Yeah, of course, Ray. Likewise.
And thank you once again for watching this episode of Ray-ality TV. If you want to see future episodes as soon as they're posted on this channel, please click the subscribe button down below, along with the post notification bell icon to the right of it. I'm Raymond Bakari, and I'll see you on the next episode.